Mysterious time travelers with convincing stories. Nearly everyone has heard a completely ludicrous time travel story at least once in their life, like the internet famous Backwoods Home magazine ad which read, "Wanted, somebody to go back in time with me." This is not a joke. P.O. Box 322, Oakview, California 93022. You'll get paid after we get back. Must bring your own weapons. Safety not guaranteed. I have only done this once before. It was, of course, a hoax, as many similar stories are. But what about real-time travelers? Do they exist? Number 1. Two professors see Marie Antoinette at Versailles, in 1901. That's something you have to decide for yourself, as no time travel stories can be conclusively proven. But there are some convincing stories of people who may have actually traveled through time. So strap in, because this list is going to take you through some of the most credible time travel stories. In 1901, two professors from St. Hugh's College in Oxford, England, went to visit the Palace of Versailles. Versailles was, of course, the French royal home until the monarchy was abolished in 1792. Marie Antoinette, one of the last royals to live there, was executed in 1793. So on that day in 1901, when Professors Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jordan were walking the grounds of the palace, it's pretty safe to say they did not expect to see Marie Antoinette in the flesh just chillin' on a stool outside the Petit Trianon, a private retreat built for Antoinette by her hubby Louis XVI. And yet, there she was, sitting and sketching and completely oblivious to the fact that two women were gaping at her and all the other people in 1780s period attire who had appeared just as suddenly as Antoinette. Antoinette and everyone else disappeared when a tour guide approached Moberly and Joan. Together, they wrote a book, an adventure, about their experience, and the story gained notoriety because of how grounded it seemed. These were two highly educated and well-respected women. They wouldn't just make up a story like that. So what was it, then? Did they actually travel through time? It's one of the most thoroughly reported, compelling, and famous time travel stories that can't be explained. Number 2. Pilot sees futuristic plane. Air Marshal Sir Robert Victor Goddard was sent to inspect an abandoned airfield in Edinburgh in 1935. It was dilapidated, of which he made note. He got back into his plane and took off, but heavy rain and low visibility prevented him from going too far. So, he turned around and headed back to the airfield to wait out the storm. As he approached the landing strip, though, something very strange happened. The clouds cleared, the sun shone brightly, and he saw that the previously abandoned land was now bustling with mechanics in blue jumpsuits. There were 4 yellow planes on the tarmac, and one of them was a kind he had never seen before. Keep in mind, this guy was a military pilot. He was pretty familiar with all the different plane models available at the time. Goddard was totally confused. Had he imagined it? Was he hallucinating? Was it a dream? It couldn't be real, certainly. But 4 years later, he was sent back to the airfield. Far from being abandoned, it was now in full use, complete with blue jumpsuit-wearing mechanics and yellow planes. And sitting on the runway was the plane he couldn't identify in 1935, a Miles Magister. The Magister was first manufactured in 1938, 3 years after Goddard initially saw it. Goddard's story is convincing because he wasn't even trying to travel through time, something unexplainable just happened to him. Number 3. Journalist sees air raid 11 years before it happens. Journalist J. Bernard Hutton and photographer Joachim Brandt were sent by a German newspaper to do a story on a Hamburg shipyard in 1932. It was an uneventful visit, until the bombs began raining down on them. Hutton and Brandt realized they were caught in the middle of an air raid and hightailed it out of there, but not before snapping some photographs. When they got back to the center of Hamburg, no one believed their story. They developed the photos they took, intending to prove to everyone that they weren't crazy. In fact, they proved the opposite. The photos showed no signs of an air raid. 11 years later, Hutton was living in London when he opened up a newspaper and probably nearly spit his coffee across his desk. There was a story about Operation Gomorrah, an air raid on Hamburg. The accompanying photos looked exactly like what he experienced in 1932. Number 4. The Green Children of Woolpit. In the 12th century, a young boy and girl were found alone in Woolpit, England. They didn't speak English, or any other identifiable language, for that matter, and their skin was green. That's right, green. They were taken in by a local villager, and though the boy died soon after, the girl survived and eventually learned to speak English. Finally, she was able to tell someone where she came from. She said she had come from a twilight-covered place called St. Martin's Land and that she and her brother were taking care of their father's sheep one day when they found a cave. They went into the cave, and after walking for what felt like a very long time, they emerged in Woolpit. Maybe it's just a folk tale. Or maybe they came from the future. After all, their story does sound suspiciously like a time slip. Unfortunately for them, they were never able to get back to where, or when, they came from. Number 5. Charlotte Warburton travels through time without even realizing it. Pixabay in 1968, Charlotte Warburton entered a cafe she had never seen before. Nothing seemed amiss, but when she tried to go back a few days later, it had vanished. Charlotte later learned that there was, in fact, a cafe in that spot, many years ago. It had been replaced by a supermarket long before Charlotte claims to have walked in and visited it. Number 6. A police officer travels to the 1950s from 1996. In 1996, a police officer and his wife were shopping in Liverpool. His wife went into a bookshop while he took off for a CD store down the street. As he walked away from the bookstore, he noticed that everything was suddenly quiet. Then, a van that looked like it was from the 1950s honked and swerved around him. Somehow, he was standing in the middle of the street, and stranger than that, everyone around him was dressed in 50s style clothing. Confused, he tried to go back to the bookstore, but it wasn't there. In its place was a women's clothing shop named Grips. So he went into the clothing shop, but as soon as he did, it was a bookstore again. He was back in 1996, but couldn't figure out what happened to him, until he learned that Crips hadn't existed since the 1950s. Number 6. The Man from Torrid. One of the most perplexing events of the 20th century did not involve flying saucers, conspiracy theories, a criminal act, or even strange creature sightings. It took place on a seemingly normal day in one of the most tedious, mundane places one could imagine, airport. Yet to this day, no one knows exactly what happened there, or why one average business traveler became the heart of an enigma largely forgotten by our modern world. The year 1954 was hotter than normal in Tokyo, but at Haneda Airport it was business as usual. That is, of course, until one unknown date when a routine European inbound plane dropped off its passengers. As the crowd made its way through customs, a neatly dressed middle-aged Caucasian man stepped up and told officials this was just a normal business trip for him, one of 3 so far this year to Japan. His primary language was French, yet he spoke Japanese and several other languages. In his wallet was a variety of currencies from various European countries, as if to verify his frequent flyer tendencies. When they asked him for his country of origin, things became strange. He casually stated that he was from Torrid, on the border between France and Spain. The officials told him that Torrid didn't exist, but he presented them with his passport, issued by the non-existent country of Torrid, which also showed visa stamps corroborating his previous business travels to Japan and other countries. Yet when they called the company he said he was having a meeting with, they had never heard of him or his company ever before that moment. The hotel he had reserved a room at had no reservation for such a person, and the bank listed on his checkbook appeared not to exist. Man without a country, who was the mystery man from Torrid? The bearded man scoffed. Surely, this was some elaborate practical joke for his benefit. Customs officials showed him a world map and pointed to the tiny country of Andorra. Perhaps that was his real country of origin and somehow he was either mistaken or having his own little joke? The man became irate, saying that Andorra didn't exist but it was right where Torrid should be. His proud country had existed for 1,000 years. Still in shock over his misplaced homeland, the mystery man was detained by customs and given a room at a nearby hotel for the night while officials tried to figure out what was going on. The following morning, the mystery deepened. Torrid's one and only known resident completely vanished from his hotel room, which had been guarded by immigration officials all night long. And to make matters worse, all of his personal documents, including his passport and driver's license issued by the mystery country, vanished from the airport's security room. Police and airport officials searched in vain for the mysterious man. It was as if the whole encounter had never actually happened. No documentation verifying this story has yet surfaced, but it was mentioned in several books, including the Directory of Possibilities, 1981, p. 86, and Strange But True, Mysterious and Bizarre People, 1999, p. 64. And given its puzzling ending, I doubt that any official would have written up a report concluding that the man and all his documented evidence simply vanished. Could this man and other out-of-place travelers be from another dimension? Surprisingly, misplaced travelers such as the businessman from Torrid have appeared on many occasions. In 1851, a man was found wandering Frankfurt and der Oder in northeast Germany who claimed he was from a country called Laxaria on the continent of Sicaria. Another young man who spoke a completely unrecognizable language was caught stealing a loaf of bread in Paris in 1905. He said he was from Lesbia, which authorities assumed was Lisbon, or Lisboa in Portuguese, yet his language was not Portuguese nor did he recognize a map of Portugal as his homeland. Is Torrid out there somewhere? And what about Laxaria or Lisboa? Did these men fall backward through time or pass through dimensions? Or were they simply perpetrating a hoax or mentally ill? Number 7. Four friends travel from 1979 to 1905. In 1979, Jeff and Pauline Simpson and Len and Cynthia Gisby were traveling through France. When it became late, they decided to find a hotel for the night. They found a place not too far down the road they were traveling. It was an odd place. The doors to the rooms only had wooden latches, no locks. And the windows only had thick shutters, no glass. In the morning, they had breakfast at the hotel and encountered two gendarmes, armed French policemen, that were wearing old-looking uniforms, complete with gapes. The whole experience at the hotel seemed strange, not least because their stay only cost 19 francs, other hotels in the area cost over 200 francs. Still, they happily went on their way, and on their return journey, tried to stop and stay at the hotel again. Except it had seemingly vanished into thin air. And the uniforms those gendarmes were wearing? They were from around 1905. Number 8. A 20th century doctor finds himself in the 1800s. In 1935, Dr. Igmoon was leaving the residence of one of his patients in Kent, England when he realized his car was not where he had left it. Both the driveway and the road seemed a lot rougher than he remembered. Dr. Moon spotted a man walking by the house, and he realized that the man was wearing several capes and a top hat and carrying a long-barreled gun. He looked to Moon like he was from the 19th century, not the 20th. Dr. Moon turned to go back to the house, but as he did, he saw that the driveway was paved again, and his car was once again parked in it. He turned back towards the road to look for the man, but he had vanished. Number 9. In 2000, a mysterious man named John Titor claimed to come from the year 2036. In November 2000, the Time Travel Institute forums saw a spike in unusual activity. Nestled among the usual conspiracy theories and far-fetched UFO sightings were a string of posts from a man who called himself John Titor. He claimed to be from the year 2036, saying the government sent him back in time to 1975 to retrieve an IBM computer, which they needed in order to debug some computer programs. He hopped off his time machine in 2000 for personal reasons, and since he was already there, he decided to warn everyone about how crappy the future was going to get. He claimed that civil unrest would begin in the United States in 2004 and there would be a full-blown civil war by 2012. By 2015, he said, a quick World War III would have come and gone. Of course, none of these things have happened, so you're probably wondering, why did people believe this wingnut? It's because his posts about time travel were so detailed, the description of its mechanics and his machine so thorough, that it seemed almost impossible that he wasn't telling the truth. Number 10. Two men from 1969 drive straight to the 1940s. In 1969, two men were having lunch in a southwestern Louisiana town. Afterward, they got in their car and headed back to work along US Route 167, a highway that spans much of the state. In the distance, they saw an old car. As they got closer to it, they realized it was moving very slowly and they could see the year 1940 printed on its license plate. The two men pulled up alongside the car and peered in to see if everything was okay. They were greeted by the sight of a woman, done up in full 1940s regalia, and a small child, both of whom looked very confused and even, they thought, frightened. They gestured to the woman, indicating that she should pull over and they would help her. As she began to pull onto the side of the road, the two men stopped a few yards in front of her. When they turned around to make sure she had parked safely, the whole car had vanished into thin air. Number 11. Preston Nichols and Albiolek claim they were part of the alleged Montauk Project. At an Air Force base in Montauk, NY, at the eastern tip of Long Island, Preston Nichols claims some top-secret government time travel experiments took place. Nichols writes in the Montauk Project, experiments in time that, in the 1980s, he recovered repressed memories of working on the project. And his claims seem outlandish. They experimented on children, One child had psychic abilities. They created a time portal to 1943. But not just any moment in 1943, the portal opened up onto the USS Eldridge, the subject of another famous alleged government project, the Philadelphia Experiment. Proponents of the Philadelphia Experiment conspiracy theory purport that, at the height of World War II, the US conducted a series of tests to try and cloak its warships. They wanted their ships to be invisible and undetectable. In October 1943, they reportedly succeeded, but there was a side effect. The Eldridge traveled back 10 minutes in time and the experience drove the crew mad. They were brainwashed afterward, their memories wiped of the whole incident. A film about these alleged events, The Philadelphia Experiment, was released in 1984. And wouldn't you know it, that film triggered some repressed memories in one Al Bielek. Bielek began discussing these memories with the press, which brought him to the attention of Nichols. The two got in touch and together told a story that linked the Montauk Project and the Philadelphia Experiment. Bielek had traveled through the time portal from the USS Eldridge to Montauk. The scientists at Montauk pushed him back through to the Eldridge. It's easy to dismiss Nichols's and Bielek's claims as pure science fiction, but the tale is so compelling, so detailed and unbelievable, don't you almost want it to be true? Thank you for watching Dreamland Orchard. If you have any true story or any video suggestions, please email me at dreamlandorchard@gmail.com.